it has now been months since I watched this movie. I am trash. I am trash. Oh boy. Good start. Hi all, it's STAZIC, and today we are talking about Iron Man 2 as part of my Marvel Cinematic Universe rewatch. Although, funnily enough, Iron Man 2 I believe is the one Marvel movie I've never watched the whole way through before, which became very clear watching it this time. I have mentioned that I wasn't particularly interested in the first Iron Man when I saw it originally in cinemas, so understandably then I had no interest in seeing the second movie since the first one bored me, and I clearly had never ended up watching it until this point. So yes, so there's that in mind. Now, I think I actually watched this movie last school holidays, and it's now school holidays again, so that should give you some indication. We'll see how well I remember it. I also want to try and paint my nails while I'm doing this, which could be a horrible idea, but I'm gonna see how we go. Otherwise, on to Iron Man 2. I have my little book to help me. Iron Man 2 was released in 2010. It was announced after the success of the first movie that they were going to be making a sequel. So The Incredible Hulk and the original Iron Man was in 2008. This movie is meant to be set 6 months after the original Iron Man, and it's meant to be kind of simultaneous, I believe, with the events of the Incredible Hulk and Thor. So that's kind of where we're at. This movie, in terms of plot, we are kind of looking at a guy who wants revenge, primarily. Well, you've kind of got two bad guys in this movie, as it were, because you've got a fellow business leader who is in competition with Tony Stark and kind of jealous of him and wants to overtake him, kind of thing. And then you've also got a man who wants revenge because Tony Stark's weapons, I believe, killed his father or something along those lines. Again, it's been a while since I watched it. So that's what we've got in terms of plot of this movie. I can say I did enjoy this movie. I'm glad now that as an adult I can enjoy some of the things that I didn't enjoy as a teenager. Otherwise, with that out of the way, we're going to kind of go through my notes. So sit down, grab yourself a cup of tea. I have mine, my little marble mug. I don't know how coherent this is going to be because it's been so long since I watched the movie and I don't know if we'll understand all my notes, but we'll try. We will try. Alright, so we start our movie with voiceover, I am Iron Man. So if we remember, the original movie left off kind of with Tony Stark announcing to the world that he is Iron Man. Publicly coming out as that, which everyone was warning him against, but in true arrogant Tony Stark fashion, he decided to do it anyway. So we start off our Iron Man 2 with that direct link to the original. Then we get a glimpse into kind of our villain backstory, as it was. We see that a Russian man dies, but another one lives to get his revenge, as it were. He has photos of Tony Stark on the wall. Yeah, I don't really remember the full context of that, but again, it's just setting up at the beginning of the movie. Then, of course, we need to bring in our Iron Man movie in much the same fashion as the original, with a kick-ass soundtrack. And we have Shoot to Thrill playing. So, that is something I appreciate. That is something I definitely appreciate about the Iron Man movies. The soundtrack and those classic sounds we get. That classic music. I do appreciate that. We then come into the Stark Expo. And, we highlight one of the problems I've always had with Tony Stark. Not that it's really directly his actions here, I guess, but we come in and Tony Stark's, you know, heading the Stark Expo, and he's got all of these scantily clad women around him on stage dressed in like skimpy Iron Man type outfits. Like, alright, cool, that's a thing. We also have our Stan Lee cameo. I'm always here for a Stan Lee cameo. So sad now. He's someone in crowd between autographs walking out. That's what I've written down. I actually don't directly remember this one. I really need to make these videos like at least within a month of watching the movie, but that didn't happen because life is busy. Yeah. Oh, then Iron Man well, Tony Stark is essentially being brought in because the government essentially doesn't trust him because he's basically walking around with a big weapon, right? That no one has control over, and, you know, blah blah blah, all of that kind of stuff. So they're wanting him to turn over the Iron Man suit because it's a weapon. There's also a bit of a worry that other countries might be able to replicate it and all of those kind of things. But, you know, he's being his typical Tony self, and he's being really snarky towards them and all of that kind of stuff. I can't remember exactly what the comment was because I haven't written the whole thing down, but I've written down that would be servitude or prostitution. So I think that's one of the kind of comments he made to them about. I don't remember the full context of that, but I remember thinking it was funny at the time. That's why I wrote it down, but it's been too long and I can't remember the actual quote. I am horrible. I hope you are getting used to how messy and disorganized my content is. Woo! We also have a new roadie in this movie. So in the original Iron Man movie, I did mention that the roadie in that isn't the one that we come to get used to in the rest. What is going on with my hair today? Because I haven't straightened it or anything, so it's just kind of poofy. I did mention that the roadie that we have in the original Iron Man movie isn't the one that we come to get used to in the rest of the MCU. So in this one, we do have the actor introduced that carries through the Avengers movies and all of that kind of stuff. So we now have the roadie we know. Tony says, "I've successfully privatized world peace. May I say how refreshing it is to finally see you in a video with your clothes on." So that's something Jarvis says, but I don't actually remember the context. Nope, don't remember the context. "Device keeping you alive is killing you." Oh, that's right, because he's that's another plot point in this movie, that the thing that's inside him, you know, keeping the shards from getting to his heart or whatever, all the stuff it's made of kind of thing, is also like infecting him and killing him at the same time. So one of the plot points is that he's trying to find something else that will work, kind of thing. "The expo is your ego gone crazy," Pepper Potts. Fair call, Pepper. Pepper's still in here trying to put Tony in his place. Oh, that's a plot point that's a thing from this movie, right? Pepper Potts becomes, Tony makes her the CEO of Stark Industries. Yes. Which of course also, though, provides conflict with then her getting even more frustrated with him because Tony Stark's a bit of an arrogant douche who just thinks about himself half the time, but we all know how I feel about him. Right, then we have the introduction of Natalie Rushman. So we have our first appearance of Black Widow, which that's a point that, because I'd never seen this movie through before, I never really watched the full appearance of Black Widow. Although, not to keep being a negative Nancy as it were, but I've never been a huge fan of Black Widow, even when I read the comics as a kid. And I think what that comes down to a bit, though, is that I find her character kind of, I don't know, boring or something. I don't know. It's like my favourite character when I read the comics as a kid was the Scarlet Witch, because I've always been into kind of magic and things like that. So I think as someone who didn't have powers and who was just like a spy kind of thing as a kid, and then she never interested me that much, so then coming into the movies I still had my like childhood biases, as it were. So I remember it was one of the things when I originally saw the first Avengers movie, which we'll get to, but I had a big rage that, first of all, it's frustrating when you only get like a token female character in a big group of men, but also the fact that the token female was a character I didn't particularly love in the first place. But that's we're going off on a bit of a tangent. We're not there yet. We get Black Widow introduced here, working as, what is she working as? Tony Stark's assistant? Oh, that's right. On first meeting, Tony Stark asks her into like the wrestling ring. At first meeting, he asks Natalie to get into like the wrestling kind of ring or whatever, and she kicks Happy's ass. Oh, and he says, after seeing her do that, he turns to Pepper and he's like, "I want one," and Pepper's like, "No," though clearly that's not what happens. Alright, how do I turn pages with wet nails? There's a Tony Stark goes off and gets into this race, you know, like a car race, which is freaking everyone out because Pepper and everyone's like, what the hell is he doing? Why is he out there? And it goes very badly because our Russian from the beginning of the movie, I don't actually remember his name, he shows up and turns out he's real good with tech because he's got these like whip things out on the racetrack and he's like slicing cars and he basically almost kills Tony Stark. He ends up losing and getting taken away. But yeah, that was a moment. There's something about, I don't know whether, looking back, I don't know whether I wasn't a big action person as a kid, although I liked things like Underworld and Tomb Raider, so I don't know what that was, because something I can say about Iron Man is that they're visually very cool, and yet I still just wasn't interested, so I don't really know what it was, to be honest. Oh, and then it turns out, so Tony's business rival essentially ends up taking the Russian because he wants to try and build Iron Man suits, right? And this guy has shown that he's really good with tech, so Tony's rival has taken him, again I don't remember his name either, Tony's rival's taken him and wants to try and use him to build suits, etc, etc. Then Tony's going into a bit of a spiral in this movie. He's in the Iron Man suit at a party at his house and that goes terribly wrong to the extent that Rhodey ends up stepping into one of his suits and they get into like a big fight because Rhodey's trying to, you know, get him to stop, blah, 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 blah. Iron Man's like, you want to be the War Machine? Take your shot, which, you know, War Machine is our character name traditionally for Rhodey. So that's a moment I think I've talked about before, how moments like that can be really cheesy, but I also at the same time kind of appreciate them. You've got a shot of him eating in the suit, like he's in the suit sitting on like a giant donut, you know, above a building and like eating. Oh, and then Nick Fury shows up and he's like, son, I'm gonna have to ask you to exit the donut. No, just the things that stand out to me, sometimes I question myself, but then we find out that the chick that's been working for him is actually Agent Romanoff. Oh, who knew? Nick Fury makes the comment, I got my eye on you. Pun. I do appreciate a good pun, I can't lie. Just excuse me while I'm still painting my nails here. Gotta do that second coat. Oh, Coulson, how do you say his name? Coulson? Anyway, he's back. What is and always be my greatest creation is you. I think that's from Tony Stark ends up, I think Nick Fury gives it to him and Tony Stark's watching this video of his dad because he's trying to work out how to, you know, I think it's all linked to, he's trying to work out how to create a new element or something so he can use that so he doesn't die, kind of thing, basically. Which, you know, that's probably why Tony Stark's having a spiral in this movie, because he is dying, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I think that's something that his dad says on the video towards Tony Stark. So that was kind of sweet, because the relationship between them had never been portrayed particularly positively before this. We also see Cap's shield. Coulson's like, you know what this is? And I think Tony Stark was like, oh yeah, and then he just uses it to like prop something up or something. Because Coulson's the Captain America fanboy, isn't he? Right? Yeah, so anyway, after watching this video, Tony figures it out, and he ends up creating a new element. Because it's... Anyway, that happens. He also ends up back at the expo, because a whole bunch of stuff goes down at the expo, because the Russian guy does end up building all these effective suits and stuff, but it turns out rather than making suits so that the rival could put people into, he's made these like robotic suits and suits that he can control because he wants to kill Tony Stark, right, and take over or just get his revenge. So that's all happening at the expo. So Tony Stark ends up at the expo, these bots are flying all over the place, causing havoc, and a kid almost kind of dies in the process, and Tony saves him. I've seen a lot of discussion about how that kid is actually meant to be Peter Parker. I've never looked into that properly, that's just something I've seen in passing, but that's a thing maybe? Then I've written boom boom boss fight. All these robots have been there, there's this big showdown between, well, both Rhodey and Iron Man end up like facing down all of these bots and trying to get rid of them and stuff. But things don't end there, because obviously our two main kind of bad guys of the movie are still out there. I've written kiss with no context, so I'm assuming that's referring to Tony Stark and Pepper Potts kissing. So, yep. Oh, that's right. And then they're like, was that weird? Do you think that was weird? And then Rhodey is around the corner, he's like, I think it was weird. Textbook narcissism, agreed. I'm assuming that's referring to Tony Stark. I can't remember who said it though. I can't even read this. Want just a consultant in exchange. We need... Oh, okay, yeah. So, basically we end up having our boss battles. People get captured. There also ends up being... I think there was a battle scene between Tony Stark and the rival too, because the rival ends up in a suit. Maybe. Don't quote me on that, it's been a while since I watched it. But basically that all gets wrapped up and it's fine. Oh, that's what the quote is. The textbook narcissism was that, you know, our Agent Romanoff was essentially there to investigate whether Tony Stark would be appropriate for the team that S.H.I.E.L.D. want to build. So she submits her report, and she basically says all this negative stuff about Tony Stark, how he's not a team player and textbook narcissism, and so recommends that he should not be part of the team they're building. So that's what that was. But they do say, you know, you shouldn't be part of the team, blah, 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 but we do need a consultant. So at this point, I think Nick Fury tells him that they're happy to have Tony Stark as a consultant. I think that was kind of where the movie ended. To wrap it up, the big bads are defeated. Agent Romanoff has said Tony is a narcissistic asshole, basically, and he cannot be a team player, he cannot be in this team, but they're happy to have him as a consultant instead. That's kind of where this movie ends. We do then also have our after credit scene, and it's in New Mexico, and it's a shot of Coulson being like, we found it, and, you know, it's Mjolnir in the ground. So our after credit scene is setting up for the next movie in the MCU, which I'm more excited about because it's my favorite character, my favorite Avenger. But yes. So yeah, you may notice I didn't really have, not that I remember it as much as I should, but I don't really have much negative to say about this movie. Tony Stark, I still think's arrogant and stuff, but I don't hate him anymore. The movie's enjoyable, the movie's pretty, the movie's got kick-ass music, like, you know, it's a good time. Again, it's Tony Stark, so that has its own amount of issues with it, but overall, I don't really have big problems with this movie like I did a little bit with the first one, and yeah, it's just fun. So we can end this on a positive note, and hopefully it won't be like 3 months until I watch and record a video about Thor. Let me know who your favourite Avenger is, since we're starting to build up our team a little. You know, we've seen a few key players already now. We've got Iron Man, we've got Hulk, S.H.I.E.L.D's been introduced, and we have Agent Romanoff, who obviously is our Black Widow, who becomes a big part of the Avengers too. So we've got several key players. Yeah, not up to my favourites yet, but we're building, we're building, we're building. Is my tea cold? Lukewarm tea. We're still good. We've still got tea. I still need to paint a top coat on some of my nails, but otherwise we'll leave it off there. Hope you gained something, some kind of enjoyment from my rambles. Yeah, we'll leave it there. Stasi out.